The lining of the stomach has big folds like this, and those folds are lined with gastric glands, and 2/3 of those gastric glands is mucus, releasing mucus. There's your thick mucosa wall to protect the lining of the stomach against the acid. Now these glands down here, they release hydrochloric acid. And if you were to put 1 drop of hydrochloric acid on your skin, it would burn a hole in your skin. You see why God made it so that there's a thick mucosa wall? Now, something else that's released from those glands is pepsinogen. Pepsinogen and hydrochloric acid unite, but only in a very acid environment. And when they unite, they release pepsin. And pepsin is the enzyme that breaks down protein. Can you see why the pepsin's not released here? It'll start to eat up your stomach wall. So the hydrochloric acid's released, the pepsinogen's released, they unite to produce pepsin, and it's pepsin that breaks down the protein. Pepsin will only work, or only be activated, I should say, in a very acid environment. So if someone's drinking with their meals, they water down the enzymes in the stomach, and the stomach knows that, so digestion stops. All the fluid has to be got rid of, and then it has to go back to digesting the food. And isn't that an Aussie habit, drinking with the meals? Every time Michael and I go to a restaurant, the first question we're asked is what? What are you going to have to drink? And we always say, no, we've already drank. Oh, well, we'll just bring you water. Now we let them, because otherwise they'll never leave us alone. We're such a fast society. People are busy, no time to drink, sat down to eat. Oh, haven't drunk. Is that right? We should stop drinking half an hour before the meal, and that means that we've got a nice acid environment, and then resume drinking 1.5 hours to 2 hours after the meal. If you sit to eat your meal well hydrated, you will not need to drink with your meals. In fact, at Misty Mountain Health Retreat, we don't serve water with the meals. And I have people say, I keep reaching for the water. I said, yeah, that's the habit. That's what we're going to look at on Saturday morning, rewiring that. And you can rewire your brain. But I'd like to speak a little bit about hydrochloric acid. Hydrochloric acid isn't just to unite with pepsinogen to produce pepsin. Hydrochloric acid is antifungal. It's antibacterial. So that if any bacteria happens to be on the food coming into the stomach, it'll wipe it out. So that's why it's very important to have nice, strong hydrochloric acid. Another thing that can exhaust hydrochloric acid is constant eating. You see, digestion, approximately, there's been lots of research to prove this, it takes 3 to 4 hours to digest a meal. And then your stomach loves a 1-hour rest. That means we should be leaving about a 5-hour break between a meal. And the only way you can do this is to have a high fibre diet. We looked at this last night. To have generous amounts of protein and to have your healthy fats. What are your healthy fats? Fats as they come from the hand of the Creator. So there's your nuts and your seeds, your avocado, your coconuts, and the 2 oils extracted from the flesh of the plant which have been eaten for centuries is your coconut and your olive oil. So it depends where you live, I guess, what oil you grow up on. We live in Australia, so take your pick. Personally, I like the taste of olive oil a little better. These are the 3 foods that keep the food in the stomach longer. Fibre, because it slowly releases the glucose. Protein, because it's in the stomach that protein is broken down. And fats, because it coats the food so it takes a little bit longer for the enzymes to get in there. And that allows us not to faint between meals because we're getting the nutrients. And by the way, even when the stomach's empty, as you'll see a little bit later on, the food's getting absorbed down here. So even when the stomach's empty, we're not going to die of starvation, you know. We're still getting those nutrients going through. Many people who feel hungry 2 hours after a meal, it's often thirst, because your body doesn't know the difference between thirst and hunger. So it's only 2 hours since a meal and you're feeling hungry, have a drink of water. I remember one day my son Peter, he was 15 at the time, he says, Mum, the water's not doing it anymore. Because I say drink. And I looked at the clock and I said, great, it's lunchtime. And that's what you find. When the water's not satisfying you anymore, it probably really is hunger. I know as a mother, I didn't want to be in the kitchen all day long. I love cooking, but I don't want to be in the kitchen all day long. And when you feed your children all day long, you're almost in the kitchen all day long. And when you feed your children all day long, you sit down to a good midday meal, they're not interested because they had an apple an hour ago. They had a biscuit an hour ago. And you've probably worked out when children say they're bored, when they say they're hungry, they're usually bored. And when they say they're starving, they obviously don't know what starvation is. Trouble is the mother heart's pulls to this. Makes life a lot easier when you just feed your children at mealtime. Dr. Michael Mosley, you've probably heard of him. He has a few shows on SBS. He's just written a book called The Fast Diet, and he talks about fasting between meals. And he talks about time-restricted eating. Have you heard of time-restricted eating? It's actually quite popular now. It's eating 2 meals in about a 6-hour period in a 24-hour day. So that's what we suggest and we do at our health retreat. Main meal at breakfast, another main meal at lunch. And if you have something at night, because maybe you're working hard and you weren't able to get a decent lunch, just have something light at night because you're just about to go to bed. So soup, bowl of soup's good, smoothie or a herb tea, something very light. Now, there's something else that's released in the parietal glands down here because remember 2/3 of those glands are releasing mucus. It's the intrinsic factor. So what's the intrinsic factor? Let me give you the B12 story because B12 is a bacteria and it's not often understood. So let me use my fingers. This is B12 and this is R protein. And in food, R protein and B12 are connected. And when R protein and B12 get into the stomach, the hydrochloric acid releases them. So now B12 is released from the R protein. And in the stomach, the intrinsic factor is released. So here's intrinsic factor. Now B12 and intrinsic factor float together all the way through the small intestine, and getting to the end of the small intestine, intrinsic factor and B12 connect. And when they are connected, then they get absorbed into the body at the last part of the small intestine. It's called the ileum. And then when it gets into the circulation of the blood, it's taken to the liver and it gets caught up in the enterohepatic circulation, which is a circulating effect. Do you know a lot of the B12 you eat is just recycled? So much so that someone can have no B12 in their diet for 30 years before they show a deficiency. So most people with B12 deficiency, it's because they don't have enough hydrochloric acid or they're not making the intrinsic factor. You see, meat eaters and non-meat eaters alike can suffer from B12 deficiency. And Dr. Neil Nedley, you might have heard of him, famous American doctor. He's written a book called Proof Positive, and he shows in there the research that is proving that B12 can be found in rainwater, B12 can be found on homegrown vegetables, on apples picked off trees, B12 can be found in organically grown root vegetables. So they're the facts that I'm giving you on B12. So let's move on. Coming out of the stomach, here's a little valve down here. It's called the pyloric sphincter. And the pyloric sphincter has sensors. So the pyloric sphincter will only open when it knows the food's broken down to a certain state. And when it gets the messages, the food's broken down to a certain state, it opens. Let's say this is breakfast, and little by little it comes in. But let's say mid-morning someone has a biscuit and a cup of tea, or a sandwich and a cup of tea. How many Aussies do that? Or maybe they're really healthy and it's an apple and a handful of nuts. Whatever it is, pyloric sphincter quickly shuts. Oops, something's just come in, it's not broken down. And that will stay shut until this newcomer gets broken down to the right state, and then it can open again. And about an hour later, what happens? Lunch. Lunch comes in. Quick, shut the gate. Something's just come in and it's not broken down properly. Do you know what the research is showing? Some remnant of breakfast can be still in the stomach at the end of the day when people are eating all day long. We've got one stomach. Cows can eat all day long because they've got about 4 or 5 stomachs. Humans have one stomach. So now what's happening when we get into the duodenum? A lot of things are happening in the duodenum. The duodenum is the first part of the small intestine. So this is the duodenum here. And notice you've got the liver and the gallbladder connects with the neck of the pancreas. Here's pancreas, and there are enzymes coming from the gallbladder, basically from the liver, and the pancreas. So let's have a look at what they're doing. So the next organ is the duodenum. It's not really the organ, but it's actually where these other organs drop into. So let's begin by looking at the liver, which, as you can see, releases into the duodenum via the bile duct. Now, when you get to the duodenum, now we're in an alkaline environment. We're back to alkaline now. Remember, the only acid is stomach. So what's the liver releasing? The liver releases bile, and bile breaks down your unsaturated fat. Whereas the saturated fat, remember where its breakdown begins? In the mouth. So what bile does, it breaks down your unsaturated fat into tiny little particles. Pancreas. As you can see by my illustration here, the pancreas is also releasing enzymes into the duodenum. So what does the pancreas release? It releases pancreatic lipase. And pancreatic lipase further breaks down your unsaturated fats. So the bile breaks it down to small particles, and the pancreatic lipase further breaks it down. Then it can be absorbed into the blood, which we'll look at in a minute. Also, the pancreas releases pancreatic amylase. Now, do you remember what ptyalin is? It's a salivary amylase. That ptyalin is a salivary amylase, and it starts the starch digestion, whereas the pancreatic amylase, it finalises starch breakdown. Remember, starch breakdown begins in the mouth, put on hold in the acid stomach, now comes into the duodenum, and the pancreatic amylase finalises starch digestion. The pancreas also releases trypsin, and trypsin is an enzyme that finalises protein digestion. Remember where protein digestion began? Under pepsin in the stomach. But also, the pancreas releases chymotrypsin, and chymotrypsin is another enzyme that breaks down protein. I've got some good news, it doesn't get much more difficult than this. We're nearly there. Students, what is the main organ of digestion? Pancreas. Can you see that? It's the pancreas. The only food that's broken down in the stomach is protein. Most of our digestion is happening here, and that is why when someone has pancreatic cancer, they usually die from malnutrition, because they cannot finalise digestion of all their main nutrients, and if that can't be finalised, it can't get out of the gut and into the blood, so the person can die from malnutrition. Proteolytic enzymes. Proteolytic enzymes are enzymes that break down protein. So a proteolytic enzyme is pepsin, a proteolytic enzyme is trypsin and chymotrypsin. In Psalm 104 verse 14, the Bible says God gave herbs for the service of man. Did you know that there are foods that are proteolytic enzymes? So from the pineapple, the core of the pineapple, an extract of bromelain can be taken out. It's a proteolytic enzyme. And from the papaya or the pawpaw, papain can be extracted, and it is a proteolytic enzyme. So if someone has pancreatic problems, they should go on, and you can buy them from the health food shop. They're often called digestive enzymes, and they contain bromelain and papain, which are proteolytic enzymes, which can help in the final breakdown of the protein. Before we move on further, what if someone has low hydrochloric acid? How can they boost it? They can boost it by eating breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, tea like a pauper, by not drinking water with their meals. But if they have the juice of a lemon in a little bit of hot water just before the meal, that can get the acid up. And a quarter of a teaspoon of cayenne pepper in a little bit of water just before the meal, that'll wake anything up. And did you know that cayenne pepper can heal a stomach ulcer? Black pepper can't, chili pepper can't, only cayenne pepper can. Because cayenne comes from the capsicum family, chili from the chili family. Well, students, we're just arriving now at the grand finale of digestion. Do you remember what I said? Anything that goes into your gastrointestinal tract is not part of you or me until it gets broken down and taken into the blood. Lining the small intestine are villi, and the villi basically look like this. And up the middle of the villi is a lacteal. That's part of your lymphatic system. And then all through the villi is your blood capillary network. Now, covering that villi, and we looked at this on Tuesday night, is a thick turf wall, and it's made up of Lactobacillus acidophilus bifidus bacterium. Makes a thick turf wall. And that thick turf wall plays a very important role in the final act of digestion. Did you know that when a baby's in utero, there's no gut flora? Their gut is what's called sterile. And when the baby's born, it's literally showered with the mother's microorganisms, and colostrum, that thick, creamy substance that's in the milk in the first few days, it's rich in the gut flora. So what happens when a baby's born and when it has that colostrum? Did you know that a farmer, if the mother dies in childbirth, is that what you call it? If the cow dies in childbirth, what the farmer does, and a farmer told me this, they squeeze that udder and get it into that little calf's mouth. It is so important that that baby calf get that colostrum. In fact, he said, if we can't do that, we may as well kill the calf. It will never, ever be strong. Let's take that to human standards. How important is that? You see, the role that it now plays, this gut flora, it's responsible for the final breakdown of our food. It's responsible for the absorption of the nutrients out of the gut and into the blood. It's responsible for protecting the blood against any harmful pathogens that might be in the gut. It's responsible for the nourishment of the little cells that line the gastrointestinal tract. How important is that gut flora? So what would break it down? Antibiotics break it down. All your statin drugs break it down. Contraceptive pill breaks it down. Cortisones, prednisones break it down. Ibuprofen, regular use breaks it down. Now, when you've got gaps in your gut flora, you've now compromised the final breakdown of your food. You have now compromised the absorption of your nutrients through to your blood. You've lost your border protection, and your cells that line the gut have now lost their nourishment. How important is that gut flora?